Welcome to Season 3 of Maintaining Mental Fitness, a free webinar series to support mental fitness for organizations and individuals in an endemic world. A big thank you to our sponsors, the Continuing Care Safety Association and Biz Safety Software.
You are as well, Daena. Thanks for joining us this morning to chat about what charges you and how to stay true to that feel. I think along that note, I'd be interested to maybe just share a little bit personal things and think about what learning have you experienced over the last few months that's really stood out about charging yourself, or just generally speaking.
Personal to me, or you want to share something personal?
No, you go ahead. Yeah, you go ahead.
That's a lot. I think there's definitely been a lot of opportunities to play with charges and drains over the last few years, and even more so the last few months. But my personal experience would definitely be with sitting in deep discomfort, borderline pain, and really finding that edge between bending. And so really learning how to sit in sadness and sit in anger without collapsing into it or falling into it. And that doesn't mean I absolutely have fell and collapsed into it, but learning how to find that edge between sitting with discomfort and falling into it, and really giving myself the time and space to feel everything in its intensity and to know when to really dive in and when to pull myself out, and really trusting my body to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. And as Adam Grant quote popped up from him recently that said, resilience is not resistance to suffering, it's the capacity to bend without breaking. Mm-hmm. And I find that a fascinating idea, the ways at which we bend, and even how we define what breaking is and what it looks like and what it means. And that will depend on what we've experienced in our past.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate you taking such vulnerable, big steps and sharing all of that. I mean, it sounds like being self-aware is really critical in that process. And I'm just interested to even hear within that, like, how do you become curious to, and even honest with what's working or sitting in, how to know when it's like, when I'm diving in or when I'm coming out, like how do you kind of move along that continuum? That sounds really fascinating.
I think it is a fascinating experience. And it's much like we are looking and asking ourselves to get curious and compassionate with others. We need to turn that inward to get curious and compassionate with ourselves and really understand why we're doing what we're doing, and getting so brutally honest with ourselves, because our minds are so intelligent. We can rationalize and intellectualize anything to make it justified and make sense for it, whether or not it's good or not for our bodies, whether our bodies truly will respond and find something to be a charge. Like, for example, you walk into a room and you smell fresh baked cookies, fresh baked chocolate chip cookies. And this has a real response for me. So it might not land for everyone, but for me, if it's not cookies for you, pick something that just gives you that yum, real yum kind of vibe. And when you step into that, you can feel like the warm and tingly sensation and the comfort and the pleasure, and that moves you and compels you to move your body towards the cookie, to pick up the cookie, to consume the cookie, and really to get curious and say, I know cookies aren't good for me. Why do I have this really yum response to it? And really, we're talking about the Pavlovian response here, where we've been conditioned. It's a program running that we learned very young, that this is yummy, this feels good, it means we're safe, we're comfortable. And that's a really strong, powerful place to be, but to recognize that that's a program. Mm. And if I ask myself right now, does my body really want a cookie? Then I tap into what my body needs now, rather than what my body is programmed to want. And just because I recognize that's a program doesn't mean I'm not going to pick the cookie. It means that I'll pick the cookie with full awareness that it might not be good for me, but I'm picking the cookie. And so when I continue to make choices with that level of awareness, then you get really, really curious about, why am I going to work out? Why am I choosing the salad or not choosing the salad?
So
and
it sounds
so
like,
yeah.
Go ahead, Dana.
No, go ahead.
I was just like, as you're talking around it about this, it sounds like, when possible, or if you can, like, try to keep some of that space between like the stimulus or the thought and the action, and then in that space maybe ask, like, why am I doing this? Like, what is that kind of what you're getting at with that?
Yeah, the famous quote, between every stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space, we have choice. And in that choice, we have power. Because what we're talking about today, we could talk about all the charges and all the drains, and we talk about all the micro skills and all the things we can do to fix and solve and do all the things. But any charge can become a drain if you're doing it for the wrong reasons or not tuned into what you need now. And any drain can be turned into a charge when you tap into why you're doing it and moving towards why you're doing it. So for example, if you're doing something, that you truly want to do, and you're really tapped in to, what does yes mean in my body? I think we've become so disconnected from our bodies, like we're head up, we over intellectualize and rationalize everything. And we've so been tuned to look outwards or externally for others to tell us what we need, what's going to charge our batteries and what's not. And it's really it becomes so much noise, because one day coffee is good for you, the next day coffee is bad for you. And, certain levels of exercise are great for you. And, all of this noise. And nobody can tell you what's best for your body than you. When you get clear, when you can get through and recognize those programs and work through past some of those programs, when you really get to know you, then you can tune into that. And so when you look at the charge that can turn into a drain, or a drain that turn into a charge, now you're really sitting with the power of choice of what to do, and being really mindful of, like, the macro decisions are the things to eat, are the ways to move, and are the things, and the micro decisions are all of the thoughts and feelings leading up to the macro choice.
Yeah, and I know this could probably be its own conversation that's not going to be for today, but as you were reflecting on what you've learned and the journey you've been going through, it had me pause and think of, I know for myself personally, like, I can be very attuned to emotions and defining them, seeing them, quantifying them in others. But I think to your point around that intellectualizing them was, like, for me, even a learning of, like, oh, that's a coping skill where you're not actually like feeling the emotion and experiencing what that is meaning in your body. And I know for me personally, as much as it sounds like really scary, which it is, so I don't want to like dismiss the fact that like going in that journey is easy and comfortable and even enjoyable at all times. But there also becomes something really empowering with, finding that connection to yourself. And I often think then it is, that ability to better recognize, like, what do you need, when you need it, and maybe even how you need it. So I think you talked a little bit about it, but I'm curious, like, do you have anything that really sticks out as to how do I recognize, like, when you need something and what it is that you might need in that time or what have you?
Yeah, even the disconnect from feeling our emotions and intellectualizing them, that's a program we learned early on, really early on, right? When you had a tantrum, when you had any kind of display of emotion in a social setting and you were punished, condemned, whatever it was for that, we learned very early on, it's not safe to express these emotions, to feel these emotions. We will not receive love if we experience these emotions. And so that's a program in itself. And so especially, and now that we're talking about this, in the workplace, the ability for anyone, especially a leader, to tap in to understand why they're feeling how they're feeling, because those feelings are going to motivate their response to their employees. Their feelings are going to motivate their behavior to their employees or to themselves. And so if you can figure it out, if you can tap in and show that and role model that, then that's where that true authentic connecting and true showing up in our full selves and our vulnerability looks like. And so one of the ways, and this might land really well for some people, this might not land at all. And if it's not landing, that is perfectly okay. But when we're getting kind of a little bit out of the head and into the body, it's as simple as asking, what does yes feel like in my body? And just notice, just simply notice. That's all you need to do at first. And then the more you ask that, kind of explore that. Do I feel it in my stomach? Do I feel it in my chest? Like, where does yes land in my body? And then you flip that and say, what does no feel like? And even asking those two questions, you can feel real distinction. And the more you practice that, the stronger the distinction becomes. And then the next step from there, and that might be months, that might be years of just exploring that question. And then from that, there's nuances to explore. And that's probably not all for this container here, but the nuances of when, fear-based yeses or nos sound and feel differently than true yeses and
Well, I also think about, I was laughing in my own head as you were sharing, because I know my tendencies even as, one that wants to move quickly and wants to solve through the problem and might respond immediately. Well, yes, like this is what it felt like in this current second. And now we should go. And so I'm also, you highlighted that it could be ranging from a moment in time to years. Mm-hmm. How do you learn to delineate, is this a thing that I just need to pause in for a second and do the yes, no, see how that feels and then go? Or is it something that I might need to keep asking over a long period of time? And I imagine it's a complex answer, but is there anything top of mind that would say, here's a general guide that you could use to know when you've hit the limit of yes and no? Do you get what I'm saying with that? Like when you can be confident in the direction that feels right?
There it is. When I feel confident in the direction. So there is no guide to that. You could imagine if you think of the way your nervous system communicates and responds to the body, and that's going to be impacted by your internal state of being, your internal factors, what's going into your body, minds, thoughts, consumption of media, food, whatever it is, that's going to create its own internal state of exploration in the body. Then you add in external factors, things outside of your control. And so when you're playing with that dynamic, all you can do is play in the now and say, do I need to explore this now? Do I have time to explore this now? And if not, that's okay. But you recognize, I don't have time to explore this now. I'm going to act habitually. And we have to remove the judgment and the shame from that because of the learning experience. In order to reset and to re-navigate the nervous system, that's going to take a lot of time and patience. And so for a lot of it, I'm recognizing that, yes, by doing this, I recognize the consequences and I'm doing it anyways, because that's what I just need right now. In the future, I will choose better. But right now, this is what I choose.
I love that the message in which you're conveying is really centered around self-compassion, because I think, again, even speaking to self or, observing others, and there's so much script that can be had of shame or guilt or whatever that then can, break the desire to keep pushing through or, create scripts of failures. And so I love the idea that, hey, this is a learning journey for all of us. And at the end of the day, we need to have compassion for ourselves, that we are going to make mistakes. There's no perfect human being. And I even like that you're talking about, that sometimes you might recognize and then jump into old programming, which in some ways to me, it raises the question that there may be at times then that you are doing things you don't want to do, or maybe feel afterwards that you shouldn't have done that. And so how how can you stay charged in that world, like beyond just saying it's okay, I feel, let's have compassion for the situation. Is there anything else that would jump to mind that would say, here's how you could stay charged when you are doing those things that maybe you don't want to do, or that you can't quite explore a new pathway for?
Well, and that's, what turning kind of the charges into drains into charges, but that piece around self-compassion, you cannot have compassion for others if you don't have compassion for yourself. And if you are acting in a way that is compassionate towards another when you don't have compassion to yourself, that's actually people pleasing. And that's actually out of alignment of integrity in yourself. And so again, practicing and coming back to self-compassion, because we are our own worst enemies. Those micro thoughts we have before the decisions we make, that's what's getting in our way. And so the more we have, or the thoughts that we have after, the shame, the judgment, that I shouldn't have done that, now I failed, now I suck, now all of those things. And we think about 400 words a minute, and they're all really usually nasty, very thoughts. And so we need to check those, get compassion in those, and then it will start to flow more into open compassion with others. And so that leads into when we're doing things we don't want. So now I recognize, okay, now I don't want to do that thing because that feels out of integrity to me. And so, but I still have to do these things because I'm living in this world. And so usually when you're not wanting to do certain things, it's like rooted in a few different places. One is that it's not good for you. And if it's not good for you, why are you doing it? It's the bottle of wine, it's the bag of chips. I recognize it's not good for me, but I'm doing it because I want to. I might, and so recognizing it, the more I recognize it, I might choose differently. The other reason you don't want to be doing something is it's an infringement on your freedom. And when it's an infringement on our freedom, that's where it feels chunky. That's when we feel stuck in traffic and we want to just rage because someone else is in our way of getting us to where we want to be. And so when we do that, then we need to reconnect to another value. So if I value freedom, if I also value my relationships, then I'm going to park my need for freedom if it's important, and I'm going to check into my value of relationship and say, this is in service of you. And then I have to assess how much energy I have to be in service of you. And I can only go up into that point where I need to step it back and say no. Then that's where boundaries come in. Now I need to be back in service of myself. And then the last reason why we wouldn't want to do something is that it's rooted in fear. And when it's rooted in fear, that usually means where we need to lean into. And we need to go softly, gently, one step in front of the other with compassion.
I almost think of the last one of like, it's walking through a haunted house where there's an exit maybe somewhere and you got to tippy toe around, and there's probably going to be some monsters that jump out at you. But if we can kind of keep moving forward, we might make through to the other side.
It's a really interesting analogy, because I think when it comes to emotions, especially in the workplace, especially when we haven't really made those connections and feel safe to explore them, is it feels like tippy toeing. And, this is something where we really want to explore is less tippy toeing, more grounded, flat foot sureness with compassion and understanding. And so the things with the things jumping out of you, we're so afraid of our emotions because we haven't had a safe space to really explore them. And we've been told that they're bad. So a lot of this fear is draining us unnecessarily. So when we're looking at keeping charged, we need to look at the unnecessary drains that are constantly draining our batteries. And that is fear of our emotions, which is fear of ourselves, which is big. Then and the way that carries and presents itself in the body could be fear of others' emotions as well. But that's really because we haven't gone there ourselves. When we go there ourselves, we don't become fearful of others' emotions. But then the drains in the body and how that shows up. So I'm sure everyone here right now, like if you could set a 30-minute timer on your phone to go all day, and every 30 minutes, check the tension in your jaw, release it. Check the tension in your shoulders, release it. Check the tension in your seat and release it. And then we complain of sore jaw and tight shoulders and my back and all of this. That's because all day we're holding all of this tension and all of this fear, trying to navigate these gray spaces. And that is causing a huge amount of unnecessary drain that then accumulates also into injury.
Mm. And I think about what you're saying is that because you're really using, like literally you're using energy to create that tension in your body, that then reduces the actual energy available to maybe do other things, like even from a literal sense, but also I could imagine it from a emotional and even like intellectual sense as well. It's interesting. And the other piece that really stuck out to me when you were conveying around, how do you stay charged, is recognizing that usually there's the three things that occur. What stuck out for me within that was the common theme of boundary. And we talk about this all the time, and sometimes joking, sometimes like ways of supporting our boundaries of like how to navigate the work we do, because I have a tendency to just keep on rolling, and you're like, no, we need to create space for lunch and like debriefing and all this different stuff. And that to me can feel like a really hard thing. And what's a way, if you're someone, and again, it's somewhat off topic, but I think it's so critical to then sort out how do you create charge and drain? How would you be able to start setting those boundaries or figure out where your boundaries are? Or is it really coming back to that self-exploration and being curious and honest with and connecting to your own internal self?
Yeah, it's really interesting question, and there's a few different directions we could go with it. I think the more comfortable place for people is physical boundaries. I think that's a safer place to start. And so I remember doing an activity many moons ago, 20 years ago, and we had this like string, and we were told to put it around, like create a perimeter around ourselves in a space that felt comfortable. And it was so wild to see all these 20 different people. Some, their wire was really close to them, and some were really spread out. And so first of all, we have our physical boundary. How comfortable are we with people getting into our space? But then when we start going internal boundaries, it's again playing with the edge of comfort and discomfort, and then pain, right? And so even in yoga, if anyone's in yoga, they call it the edge. What is the level of stretch that you can get where it feels uncomfortable enough so that you're getting progress, because there's growth in discomfort, but not so far that you're go into pain and injury. And if you're not going far enough to your edge, then you're just hanging out, not really doing anything. And so emotionally, when we're talking about internal boundaries, we're talking about emotions and energy exchange. But so what you want to do is play and find your edge, and then know how to ask for what you need. And that's a whole other topic. And building relationships in which you can ask for what you need. And then so within the context, chaos is great. Chaos is creative, but it needs to be in smaller containers in order for it to be productive. If we have chaos constantly, we'll go past our edge and into pain and into injury. And if we have too tightly restricted boundaries, we won't get anywhere. We won't be doing anything. So, and that's different for every single person. It's different for you every single day. And so again, it's feeling into that so that you know how to respond, rather than responding from, it's lunchtime, it's time to eat. Well, no, it's just my body need to eat right now. And I know that just kind of jump back and forth, but if we're in a meeting and saying, my mind says it's time to stop. Well, what is this? What's the productive? Like, what feels best? Is it time? And, that's when you might cut meetings short and say, time out. This is just not productive and not going anywhere, versus, yeah, this is feeling really good. Everyone got 30 more minutes. Let's hard stop in next 30 minutes. And even just playing with that, but checking in with everyone. And in order to do that, you need to check in with yourself.
I love what I'm picking up from where you're going with what you're saying is that it really requires that continual checking in with self and others. And there is no magic bullet or perfect process of this is what it should be, because it is going to be individual to self, and also then interrelational to those around you, where there might be different relationships that exist in a one-on-one situation versus even a team situation. And the piece I come back to bringing it from a leader perspective, even with what you're saying, is how much there's such a deep need to create flexibility or create space in allowing some of that individual flux that's going to happen in the day to day. But again, that's probably for another conversation, but it's something that really strikes me with all of the things that are happening around us. There seems to be such a deep need for flexibility, and as a leader, then figuring out what are you actually managing? Are you managing the how they get to the outcome, or the outcome? And again, I think it fosters a lot of really interesting questions.
Yeah, and we use this word flexibility a lot, and I feel like there's this idea that we just need to be like constantly bending and kind of flopping around, and that's difficult when it comes to accountability. And so when you think about the integrity of a leg muscle, right, like in order for the quadricep to be flexible, then something else needs to contract, right? Then the hamstring needs to contract. And so in flexibility, yes, there needs to be some flexibility, but then there needs to know what needs to stay strong. What is the structure that will allow the flexibility to happen? So it's a constant dynamic movement, and the best guidance system is yourself when you get past all of the noise.
Yeah. With that, as we look into wrap up, I'd just be curious, you've shared a lot in a really vulnerable way. And I've actually, for me, found it such an interesting experience listening in of like your vulnerability, making it feel a little bit safer to do some even self-exploration as we're talking. And I'm sure many on the call might have felt similar. But with that, if I could ask you to take another step of, forward vulnerability, what's one thing for you that you would find you're learning, unlearning, relearning within your journey to connecting to yourself?
So I love this quote that really taps into this charge and drain idea, in that self-care isn't about bubble baths. It's about creating a life you don't want to escape from. Because when you think about all of the decisions we make that temporarily charge us but really drain us, the things that we are escaping from, the booze, the drugs, the media, the food, the things that we use to stuff down the discomfort to feel good and pleasurable for a little bit, that's we're escaping. We're escaping from the parts of ourselves we don't want to meet, talk to, and we just want to avoid. And so really unlearning the process of escape and digging in and leaning in and greeting, and then choosing to escape sometimes. Because we're human, and that's okay.
Sometimes a glass of wine is needed.
Exactly. You dip in and you dip out. It's a dynamic movement in yourself, and we have to have fun along the way. That's what I think. I believe we have fun.
Well, this was amazing, Daena. I really appreciate the vulnerability, the courage in wading into a conversation that I think is new, uncomfortable, fearful, all of the things for a lot of us. But it really feels like it's a conversation that we need to be starting and continuing to have inside the workplace as we take on all these big things that are going to come with such massive emotions around them, and feelings and uncertainty and all of this. And so finding ways to connect with yourself is, I think, so critical. And thanks again, and really, really appreciate you adding your voice to the conversation.
Thank you.